Hey sidekicks, welcome back to another video. Just before we begin, if I do sound sick in this video, I think that's because I might have some sort of cold going on, and I apologize in advance if I do sound a bit under the weather, but that's how it is. I felt really bad yesterday, but I think it's gotten a little bit worse, so yeah. Now, as a comics artist myself, I tend to write my own stories and illustrate them. I often have this question about what kind of stories I like to tell, what stories I should tell. I know certain principles of storytelling like to do with characters, pacing, plot, and setups and payoffs. It's just, I find that's often the most difficult place to start, is to figure out what type of story I like to do. And it's not really as simple as saying an action story or a romance or horror, although my stories can certainly fall into certain genres depending on what they're about. And yeah, I think it's important to remember there are certain things that one genre can do that another cannot, and each one has different focuses and expectations on the type of stories. But is it more that I need to just try out these things and maybe try to level up my skills as a writer and an artist through the course of trial and error? Perhaps it's more a case of you trying things out to see what you like and what possibilities lie forth. I think if there's one thing that I'm solid about, it's that you shouldn't focus too much on superficial details like costuming or type of weapons. If your story even has a certain level of combat or conflict involving weapons and stuff like that, you start with the fundamentals first with anything, of course. In the past, I've done comics that are 10 pages and mainly fantasy themed. They don't have as much world building in them. I think that's what I like to do, and that's the benefit with certain long stories. There's things you can, I guess there's a character you can set up and see him change over time, and that's one of the cool things I find with writing is setting the rules and establishing the stakes in the story. I used to have this sort of taste about films too. I wanted to explore an idea rather than characters and how they change throughout the story. I say this as a guy who's more familiar with video games than comics, admittedly, but I mentioned conflict before, and that's a thing that any writer in any medium can come up with. It's establishing conflict, and the one that comes to mind for me is Silent Hill's conflict. It's actually pretty simple. You play as a father who's been in a car crash and suddenly his daughter is gone missing in this mysterious and seemingly abandoned town. And the genius in that is how it progresses from that point on. At least that's my summary of the first game, from what I know. And I think that's a mistake I often make when writing, is that I often start out with a dry sort of explanation of what the character's settings and world is like, and it's more about establishing what is good about the world and how you empathize with the characters and whether they're in a good state or not. And I'm sure Silent Hill, again, anyone can relate to someone going missing that they care about dearly, especially a family member. I know that's I remember working on these campaign posters for missing persons, campaign across the country, so I'm familiar a bit with that subject matter, but still, like, that story establishes what is good, or what your, like, audience should care about, and that's from, like, a horror game. So in order to understand what makes that, like, game horrifying, you have to understand what is at stake and what is the good in that story. Sometimes it can even be like, if you focus on a bounty hunter or like an assassin like Kill Bill, you see the film from her perspective, and I guess you know in the beginning she's a competent in hand-to-hand combat and a skilled professional assassin. And that can be a kind of good, that, like, sense of security, knowing you can defend yourself and fend off, like, threats and stuff. That can be a source of good that's later threatened by the conflict that's introduced later in the inciting incident. So those are just a few examples, but it doesn't really solve the problem of what type of story should I tell. From what we've been over, we understand that it's easy to establish a conflict in a opposition to a certain good in the story, and I think you gotta find out what you connect most with the types of stories you want to tell, whether it be through characters, world building, ideas and opinions like the author may have, and how they explore that through the story. And this isn't going to get into marketing, but I can totally see why superheroes are so easy to get behind, because they either have superpowers and don like a costume that's visually appealing and fight, threats bigger than themselves, and people enjoy that escapism into being a heroic, overcoming threats greater than yourself. And again, with horror, there's an appeal to being scared or having a downer ending to your story. There is a huge market for things like that, and things don't always turn out good in Game of Thrones. In fact, more often than not. Same can be said about romance. I haven't explored it myself that much. I've only read romance from, like, Holly Brown's webcomic Purgatory, and the other one called Long Exposure by this person called Mars. But once again, that genre is also flourishing in today's market. What's always important to keep in mind is writing a well-told story that you and others can connect with, while also providing some form of catharsis. And that can be done emotionally, intellectually, or even logically, because it always shows you put in the hard yards in terms of writing and making your story airtight. So yeah, that's what I have to say on that. It's kind of funny, because even just rambling into this microphone, I come up with ideas on the spot. And just the magic of making videos sometimes. But yeah, I think you guys should go out and look for 3 of your favorite, like, works of fiction, and try to look at things that you connect most with. And then you will write what you want to write, and so will I. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Leave a thumbs up if you did, and let me know what you think in the comments below. And once again, I'll see you guys next time. Cheers, and have a good day.